Hi, welcome to the Recovery Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Abbasi. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic and stroke survivor. You know what's interesting? My new last name, you can't say it without smiling. You have to say Abbasi. So there you have it. I'm a happier person now that I'm married. All right. So what I want to talk about today is the signs that our lives have become unmanageable. So this is step one, admitting that we're powerless and our lives have become unmanageable. This has to do with how each and every alcoholic has a different bottom. Each person has a different threshold, can experience some can experience not a lot of stuff, and they're like, my life is unmanageable, I gotta get sober. I wish that was me. That was not the case. And so I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about what my chaos looked like and some of examples of unmanageability in my life. But know that, when you're listening to examples that I give, it may not be unmanageable to you. Or it could be the opposite. It could be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. You know what I mean? And I'm going to not go into too much detail about some of the unmanageability. Some of it is private to me, of course, and I wouldn't want to talk about it over the internet, but I will give some examples of what unmanageability was, what my bottom became, and what I thought was my bottom. So I have talked about in the past that I actually went to detox and went back out and drank for another 8 months and then went back into detox. So what was the difference between the first bottom and the second bottom? So we'll see if I can distinguish between the two for you. And so here we go. My story was that life was chaotic, okay? But life was chaotic here. And it wasn't necessarily chaotic looking to other people. It depends on what circle you were in of the people around me. If you were my boyfriend, yeah, it was probably looked chaotic. If you were my mom, eventually it looked chaotic, but it didn't look as chaotic to her as soon as it looked chaotic to my husband now. So as the chaos multiplied exponentially, it began to affect people further and further out in my circles. And it wasn't until I started prioritizing money for alcohol over paying my mortgage that I got to that first bottom. So the first bottom for me was that I was using money for buying alcohol every day, and letting my bills begin to not be paid and not even opening the envelopes. Like just knowing that, okay, I can't pay that if I'm going to buy alcohol. And that was the way that I was going to do it. I didn't even open the envelopes for the bills, because if you don't open it, what is that Schrodinger's cat? If you don't open the box, look it up if you don't know what it is. But that's how I was with my bills. Just don't open the bill and it doesn't exist. So that I was lying to the people I love the most, including my kids and my boyfriend of over a decade. I wasn't lying to him for a decade. I was dating him for over a decade, and I was lying to him about um, acting like I wasn't drinking, saying that I wasn't drinking when I'm pretty sure he knew that I was drinking and my kids knew that I was drinking, but I was lying to their face. When they asked me if I was drinking, I just said no. I was just lying, straight up being deceitful to the people that I love the absolute most in my life. And I was drinking just 24/7. I was drinking on the way to work. I was drinking in the car. On the way to work. I was drinking when I got to work. I was drinking at lunch during work, and I was drinking on the way home. And then I was drinking, it was constant, it was 24/7. And then TMI, my bodily functions were starting to not work. And an example of that is that when I urinated, it was a bright orange, almost red color. And I did not stop. That was not a sign to me that, hey, maybe something's going on inside of you that needs to stop. I had an inkling of an idea that something was wrong. Isn't that weird? I had proof, physical proof that my body was shutting down. And I just didn't look at it, I just didn't look at it. It's like not opening the envelope for the bills. I just didn't even look at it. If you don't look at it, it's not there. And that was how I dealt with everything. I ended up, so I also, let me give you a couple more examples. I lost a job prior to this, and they got rid of me because I was an alcoholic. I know this. They didn't say we're getting rid of you because you're an alcoholic, but they got rid of me because they have to put the company first, and I was a risk to the company. So they gave me like a severance package, and they like told me that I had to move to the headquarters or take a severance package. So I took the severance package, and because they knew I wasn't going to move. And for the longest time, I was mad at them. Isn't that terrible? I was mad at them. Now, I do still feel a little irritated with them. Now, this was not the company that I just left. That company was amazing. This was the company before that where they never tried for a second to help me get sober. And I really believe that companies have the resources. That's what we have HR departments and stuff like that. We have now insurance offers solutions, and we can help employees get sober, or at least give them the resources and the flexibility to try. But I didn't get that at all. And so when I left that job, that wasn't enough. I left my poor puppy outside in a storm all night long because I passed out. Not this puppy, not my Weimaraner and Bulldog, but my old dog that I used to have. that still wasn't enough for me. I embarrassed my boyfriend many, many times in front of his family, in front of other people. Um, and not to mention, I risked everybody's life that was between my house in Charlestown and my job when I drove drunk every day, both ways. So, all of these things just still weren't enough for me. And I falsely believed that I hadn't hit rock bottom because on the outside, I still looked like my life was intact. I was still taking care of my kids, albeit I was not getting my kids to school on time. When they asked me if they could stay home, I'm like, sure, I wasn't being a responsible parent. And, but they were doing well in school. That wasn't because of me. That's because I have good kids. And I had neglected my own hygiene. And then there's my emotions on the inside. My emotions, I was trying to think of how to articulate what they felt like. And the best I could do was my emotions felt like wild animals that were unleashed inside of me. And they were just untamed. There was nothing I could do. I had no control over them. I stopped showing up for life. Literally, I stopped showing up for work. In the end, I just didn't even go to work anymore. I stopped. I'd tell my mom I'm going to come. I think one of the things that sticks in my craw is her sister was visiting, and I I was going to take them out for the day. And instead of doing that, I drank. And I said I wasn't going to come. And I hurt them. I hurt their feelings. And I've apologized for it since I've been sober. But, that sister of my mom's is gone now because she passed away from ALS. And she was one of my biggest fans in sobriety. She was so proud of me. She told me that. And I'm so grateful to know that because I hurt her and I can't change that, My ex-father-in-law, he came to town to go to one of my daughter's soccer games, and instead of showing up with my daughter for the soccer game on time, I drank and stayed up all night and overslept. And when I finally showed up to the soccer game with the young child that he came to see play, he was sitting on the sideline waiting. And I never did get to make my amends to him because he also passed away. But before he passed, he asked to see me, and he said that he forgave me. And I didn't know at the time because I was still drinking. I didn't know what he was forgiving me for. But he had a lot of experience over the years with Alcoholics Anonymous, and knew that I was trying to get sober and hadn't yet. But he was very familiar with the steps of AA. And I know 100% that he provided me with his forgiveness because he knew one day I was going to get sober and I was going to want to make my amends to him and he wasn't going to be there. So these things that I did to hurt other people were not on purpose, but it came out of selfishness. It didn't feel like selfishness. It felt like I was trying to save myself. It felt like putting alcohol in me was self-medication. I was trying to keep myself from breaking. I was trying to keep myself from having an emotional breakdown, a real emotional breakdown. And in doing so, I just slowly started to not show up for life. I had no idea the difference between what I could control and what I couldn't control. I really oscillated between feeling like I was in control of everything, which isn't accurate. I can't control people, places, and things. But if I had enough alcohol in me, believe me, I thought I could control people, places, and things. Everyone and everything. And if I didn't have enough alcohol, or I woke up in the morning and I was hungover and I couldn't get alcohol fast enough in me, then I had that feeling of utter powerlessness, that I couldn't control anything, including my own, movements. I was just like trembling and it was terrible. And I was running to the bathroom to throw up. I would go to the bathroom and be throwing up, and I would have a glass of wine next to me. This is in the morning. This is at like 7 o'clock in the morning. I had a glass of wine with me beside the toilet, and I would throw up, and then I would drink the wine. And I just kept doing that until I had enough wine in me that I was not throwing up anymore. And then that was the beginning of my day. I had no control over my alcoholism. I had no control over my reactions to people in my relationships. I had no control over my behavior because the only thing that had control was alcohol, and it was over me. So at the point where I was able, like I said yesterday, it's a freaking miracle that I somehow was able to admit my powerlessness over alcohol. And that was the turning point. And what was that bottom? Like what did that look like? Well, I just stopped going to work. I stopped going anywhere. And I looked in the mirror. I've told you that you might be sick of hearing it, but I looked in the mirror and said, you're already dead. And that was my bottom. My bottom was looking in the mirror and realizing that I wasn't even alive anymore. My body was still pumping blood, but I wasn't even alive anymore. And my daughter said, I never actually even sat down with her and said, look, I'm drinking again. Nothing. She just knew. I mean, everybody knew. Um, and she said, you can try again. And I did. And I've been sober ever since. I feel like that's exactly what I said yesterday, but that's okay because that's what happened for me. And by admitting this powerlessness over alcohol, by admitting that I had no control over alcohol, was when I was unexpectedly granted control over my life again. It marked the beginning of my sobriety journey, and it also marked the beginning of a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. Putting myself first felt selfish, which is interesting because that's not selfishness to go to these sobriety meetings and work the steps and meet our sponsor and meet up with people in the network. That's not selfishness. That's self-care. That's self-love. That's self-respect. And yet, for me, it felt like I was being selfish. But I feel like I felt that way because I felt guilty that I had even put myself in that position, that I had to fix myself, that I had to put that much energy into turning my life around. But I felt shame about how long I had prioritized alcohol over everything and everyone around me. So this new thing in my life where I was going to focus on myself and heal myself, um, it was foreign to me, even though it seems like, we go through this whole period of selfishness when we're putting alcohol in front of everybody, in front of everything and everyone. And then when we decide we need to get sober, then we have to put our sobriety before everything and everyone. And that's why I was talking 2 days ago about how we make other people feel. It's like, when is my turn? And when I listened to that movie, um, when love when love isn't enough, it's the Lois Wilson story, which is the wife of the one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was so accurate what our spouses and loved ones must feel like when it's like, okay, I wasn't a priority in your life when you were drinking. Now I'm not a priority in your life because you're not drinking, you know? But if our loved ones are able to get involved and communicate with us, they can live live the journey with us. Um, you know, it's difficult to acknowledge that selfishness, but when we communicate to the ones around us that we did this to, um, then we're not alone. We're not doing it alone, and they can travel with us. So this this total loss of a grip on my life led me to self-medicate to the extreme, to want to numb myself thoroughly and permanently, because when the alcohol started wearing off, I had two things happening. I have an anxiety disorder, but in addition to that anxiety disorder, I was having withdrawal. And then on top of that, in my family, we have something called familial tremor syndrome. And I was sure that I had that too. So familial tremor syndrome, it feels like your muscles are jumping under your skin. And depending on the degree of it, other people can see your hands shake. What mine feels like when I don't take my anxiety medication is that it feels ever so slightly like it's jumping under my skin. And the longer I don't take my medication, the more it starts feeling the way that it used to, when I was drinking and I didn't have alcohol. And I think the reason why is because when I was drinking, my anxiety medication wasn't working. It says it on the bottle, but I ignored it. So I really believe that I was dealing with a lot with layers of trembling problems, from withdrawal to anxiety to familial tremor syndrome. That was also a physical representation of my bottom, that I couldn't hold things in my hand. Like I couldn't hold a water bottle and just drink out of it. It was I remember having my husband carry things for me. Like he would have to carry a cup of coffee for me because I couldn't. And I thought that this was the beginning of me really having tremors my whole life. I never was willing to admit that it was the alcohol. So once in sobriety, this self-care, um, although it's saving me, everything that I do, every little thing that I do is to heal physically, emotionally, mentally, but by extension, my relationships began to heal. And although I felt selfish prioritizing my sobriety, it's not selfishness. Like I said, it's self-care. And just the mere fact that getting sober and prioritizing my recovery felt like selfishness, to me, means that I was very, very sick. It takes quite some time, at least a year, I think, for it, at least for me for my head to feel like it's on straight again, to be able to like think clearly. And sobriety has taught me about the things that I can actually control and the things that I can't control. And one of the gifts of the program is recognizing that I no longer have to fight for control over that stuff that I'm never gonna have control over. And I used to drink to fill the gap, to fill that, I don't know. I used to drink to make it better. I don't know how to say that. It made me feel like I was in control of something. I could control how much of this alcohol I put in my body, and nobody could tell me not to do it. I was going to do it no matter what. And nobody ever did tell me not to do it. That's not true. That's not true. But I felt like whether they told me or not, it was my decision. And it was. It was my decision whether I was going to pick it up or not. And I was just plain old defiant. I was just going to drink. So sobriety has shown me the importance of managing the things that I can control. Not only what I can control, but how to manage that. Because once you realize what you can control and what you can't, the serenity prayer, then you got to figure out what's the best way to manage the stuff that I can control. And that's where all the steps come in for me. It helps me to respond instead of react. It helps me to thoughtfully behave. I'm no longer behaving and then looking back and thinking like, oh, that was terrible. There is nothing worse than waking up in the morning after you've had a full night drinking and you can't remember what you did, and you feel this like flush come over you and you're like, oh my God. Like when you start remembering what you did, or you start calling somebody and asking what you did because you've got on different pants than when you left or something like that. You never. Oh boy, I never want to go back there. I never want to go back there. And sobriety has shown me the importance of self-care. And by placing sobriety, at the top of my priorities, everything else just follows. Everything else just automatically gets a little bit better when I focus on my sobriety. Alcohol felt like it gave me control, but it was just taking it all away. Sobriety has offered me this path of reclaiming control and reclaiming control over my life and healing my body, my mind, my emotions. My emotions, like I never ever dealt with anything. I never grew up. I was still a child. When I got sober, I was still dealing with things the way that I did when I was in middle school. And once I was able to start working with a addiction therapist and working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I started to be able to live more simply. And I was able to begin to rediscover the way that life looked when I was a child. It's not the absence of struggle now that I'm sober. That I'm still dealing with all the complications of living, but I'm able to deal with them in a thoughtful way And as I deal with them, there is this constant presence of hope and solutions and serenity. I have a life now that stands on top of a foundation of self-love, of purpose. I've been talking a lot about, now that I'm in stroke recovery, about finding my purpose, But I think purpose in this way, what I'm talking about is, and maybe they're the same thing, and maybe I've just had an epiphany, is that purpose of what life is really for me, what life is really about for me. I think I did just have a little bit of an epiphany live on camera. Just that my family is a priority. My health is a priority. Helping others is a priority. Communicating with people is a priority. I have this foundation of values. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of, is this foundation of values. And in order to reach those, in order to leverage them or surface them or make them come to fruition, I have to take care of myself. I have to be very self-aware. And what has taught me how to be self-aware is the 12 steps of AA. That is what has taught me how to live. And I'm going to forever be grateful for that, for this new way of life that I have. So, thank you for joining me today on Recovery Daily Podcast. I will talk to you tomorrow.